It never starts with chaos. It starts with small changes no one notices. A price that jumps, a paycheck that doesn't stretch, a map of America quietly rearranging itself. Because when money shifts, nations follow, and the next shift won't hit every city the same. Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning and your savings account shows the same numbers, but those numbers suddenly feel different. The coffee that cost $4 yesterday now costs $12. Your mortgage payment stays the same, but your paycheck no longer stretches as far as it used to. At the gas station, prices rise faster than you expect, and everyone around you is trying to understand what's happening. This isn't a doomsday fantasy or a Hollywood disaster scene. It's a realistic look at how a severe currency disruption could affect everyday life in America. And while scenarios like this are unlikely, history offers examples worth understanding. The United States dollar has held the position of the world's reserve currency for more than 8 decades, a unique advantage that has allowed America to finance growth and absorb shocks better than most nations. But reserve status isn't a permanent guarantee. It's a reflection of global confidence. And today, with national debt reaching new heights, some countries gradually diversifying their reserves and international trade relationships shifting, analysts are beginning to ask a difficult question. What would change inside America if the dollar's global dominance weakened? Not apocalyptic collapse, but practical, real-world adjustments. What emerges from this scenario is a map of America that looks very different from the one we know today. Certain regions would become more essential. Others would face significant strain. The transformation is surprising, and in many ways, counterintuitive. Every major currency disruption in history has followed recognizable patterns. The Roman Empire reduced the silver content of its coins as costs climbed. Weimar Germany printed marks to meet obligations during economic turmoil. More recently, nations like Argentina, Zimbabwe, and Lebanon have gone through rapid inflation and dramatic economic adjustments. These examples are used here purely for comparison, to understand how systems respond when confidence weakens, not to predict identical outcomes. America's case is unique because of its scale and global interconnectedness. If the dollar weakened significantly, the effects wouldn't be confined to one region. They would ripple through supply chains, industries, and local economies across the country. Take California, the world's 5th largest economy if it stood alone. It produces enormous quantities of food, yet its tech industry relies heavily on imported components and global trade flows. In a major currency adjustment scenario, those dependencies could become challenges. Import-heavy industries would face higher costs, and supply chains might need time to rebalance. Meanwhile, regions that today sit far from the spotlight could suddenly become critical. The agricultural belt stretching from Iowa to Kansas would gain new importance because domestic food production becomes central whenever global purchasing power weakens. Heartland crops, distribution hubs, and food processing facilities would form the backbone of national stability. Energy-rich states would also rise in strategic importance. Alaska's oil fields, Montana's minerals, Wyoming's natural resources. These aren't just commodities, they're anchors of economic resilience when international imports become less reliable or more expensive. The nation's center of gravity would shift inward, away from globalized coasts and toward resource-based regions. This pattern mirrors history. When nations face currency challenges, value moves toward what is tangible: food, energy, manufacturing, logistics, and essential goods. Urban economies would feel these changes differently. New York, whose financial sector is intertwined with global capital, could experience a recalibration as international money flows adjust. Miami's real estate market, supported by international investment, might feel pressure before stabilizing into a more domestically driven economy. But this is not a uniform story of decline. Some cities would find opportunity in reinvention. Detroit, long familiar with economic transformation, could emerge as a manufacturing center as production returns to American soil. Midwestern cities that once housed industrial giants could regain significance as domestic manufacturing becomes cost competitive again. This regional reshuffling would create a patchwork of economic realities. Financial centers might slow while resource-rich and manufacturing-oriented areas accelerate. Coastal areas that rely heavily on imports could face short-term strain, while inland regions with strong productive capacity move into new prominence. Transitions like these rarely unfold gradually. Modern supply chains operate on tight schedules that assume stable exchange rates and predictable pricing. When those assumptions shift, the effects are felt quickly. But so is the response. Domestic producers move to fill gaps, supply chains reroute, and new industries emerge. The result isn't chaos, it's adaptation. The landscape of America, after a dollar adjustment, wouldn't look like a disaster movie. It would look like a country rediscovering parts of its economy that had been overshadowed for decades. Consider California's tech sector. If imported components became more expensive, the challenge would be significant. But the talent, innovation, and problem-solving ability remain. Those same minds could accelerate domestic semiconductor development, battery production, and critical technology supply chains. The Pacific Northwest, home to Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, would shift from optimizing global efficiency to building regional resilience. With abundant hydroelectric power, advanced logistics, and technical talent, the area could become a hub for domestic infrastructure rebuilding. The Great Lakes region presents one of the most compelling examples. Cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and Milwaukee still have the industrial skeletons that once made them global manufacturing giants. A shift in global purchasing power could make it economically logical to bring manufacturing back to these regions. Factories, supply chains, and skilled workers, many underused today, would find themselves essential again. Manufacturing wouldn't return because of nostalgia, but because math demands it. Even everyday goods would transform. America imports nearly all of its clothing today. In a currency disruption scenario, domestic textile production becomes viable again. The South still has cotton fields. It still has textile facilities. It still has workers with generational knowledge. The capability never disappeared. Only the economic incentive did. A weaker dollar could revive entire industries overnight. Agriculture would experience one of the most dramatic shifts. Farmers who today focus on export crops would pivot toward feeding the domestic market. Smaller agricultural regions near population centers would flourish as transportation costs become more important than access to global trade routes. Socially, Americans would adjust in ways that past generations would recognize. Local repair shops would thrive. Home gardens would expand. Skilled trades would gain prestige as communities depend more on local problem solving than global convenience. Education would shift too. Degrees in engineering, agriculture, logistics, and skilled trades would become as critical as high-tech roles. Universities would adjust to train students not just for global corporations, but for domestic industries that require innovation and resilience. The timeline for these adjustments might be shorter than most expect. Months, not decades. But the outcome isn't decline, it's transformation. America, forced to lean on its own strengths, would rediscover industries that once powered its rise. The coal mines of Appalachia, the wheat fields of Kansas, the factories of Michigan, the innovation hubs of the Pacific Northwest, all would play new roles in a reshaped economic landscape. The most important lesson is simple. Economic power comes from the ability to create value that people need. Food, energy, shelter, tools, technology, not from financial complexity alone. History shows us that monetary systems evolve, but human needs endure. New currencies, new systems, and new trade networks always emerge. And America has the resources, talent, and adaptability to rebuild strength under any monetary environment. The real question isn't whether such changes will happen. It's whether we understand the underlying patterns well enough to navigate whatever future emerges.